off air. Live. Okay.
Oh, we're live.
Hooray!
Hello.
We did it.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to our first ever webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We are 21 Toys. So for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we design and manufacture toys that teach empathy, failure, and use toys as tools for creative communication. So we are being used in homes, classrooms, and most recently actually in offices. So this is our first webinar.
Hooray!
So very exciting. You'll learn with us. And yes, we're very excited. I am the founder of 21 Toys and the designer of the Empathy Toy.
And your name is Ilana.
Oh, and my name is Ilana.
Yes, that's right. And my name is Ryan. I'm the education lead here at 21 Toys. And the whole purpose of this webinar series is really to highlight some of the really innovative work that educators are doing. So, you know, we've designed the toys and put out some materials for them, but a whole bunch of really fantastic teachers and facilitators have been taking those materials in all sorts of exciting new directions. So we would like to be able to highlight some of those new directions, starting with a wonderful educator from Winnipeg named Robin, who you'll get to meet very shortly.
So before we introduce Robin, just to let you know, if you have any questions during the webinar, I know we've got a number of people joining us, you can just have your questions in the right-hand corner, I believe, if you press any of those questions, and we'll be answering them after we have our initial talk with Robin. So yes, we are just in our second year with our Empathy Toy, and in our first year we were in about 50 schools, and we went back to those 50 schools to find out how they're using the Empathy Toy. What we discovered was that what we initially expected was being used with the toy was actually quite limited. So we thought that educators would be using it to talk about empathy and maybe a little bit about teamwork, but when we went back we found out that they were being used from anything from leadership and career classes. We have a grade 2 teacher using it for science and math, and we even have organizations like the Global Minimum Project through MIT Media Lab using them for design thinking. So we decided to launch this webinar series to essentially share some of their stories.
Yes, and today on the program we have Robin Wilson, who I mentioned very briefly before. Robin is from St. John's, which is a high school out in the north end of Winnipeg. It's from grade 7 to 12, and she's been using the Empathy Toy for actually over a year right now. So hello, Robin. Welcome, welcome to the program.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Robin.
How are you doing tonight? Excellent.
Good.
All right, so the work that you do at St. John's, we know a lot about it, and we know that it's actually quite diverse. Would you be able to just share with us a little bit about you know, what you do there and explore some of the diversity that exists at St. John's?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm the grade 7 and 8 guidance counselor, and we occupy the second floor of our big building. And there's just a whole range of programs for students in grade 7 and 8 at St. John's. We have an advanced placement program for students. Just school's their thing. They're looking for that extra challenge. We have special education centers for students with cognitive disabilities. We have a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder program. We have behavior classrooms, students with some behavior issues that they're working on, as well as a program called Second Chance, which is a small closed classroom setting for students who are experiencing anxiety at school and just need a quieter, more structured environment, as well as just your regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill grade 7 and 8 classrooms.
Yes, that is definitely diverse. So we weren't just
Yes, it is.
when we said that. So I'm really curious to know how empathy plays a role in that work. And this is a two-part question. So
Yeah.
how have you traditionally used empathy to be able to deal with this wide spectrum of students? And then how has that process evolved since you've been using the Empathy Toy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as a guidance counselor, when I see students in my office one-on-one, empathy is a huge part of my work in trying to understand them and where they're coming from. And, you know, a lot of my work is with groups of students after a conflict, trying to make things right through restorative practices, which I'll talk about in a bit. As well as smaller groups of groups of boys, groups of girls, developing emotional literacy and just communication skills, as well as in full classroom environments. So yeah, empathy is huge. Whenever there's sort of an issue, it seems that it's always somewhat relational in nature, and so empathy is key to improving relationships, teaching students explicitly how to be able to understand their own emotions as well, and most importantly, recognize different emotions in others and be able to communicate that understanding. So it's huge.
So Robin, could you tell us actually a bit of the focus going from anti-bullying, where that's kind of where the work that you're doing was really focusing on, and that shift?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, most educators out there listening would agree that bullying is huge in the media right now. And in order to combat bullying, we found that at St. John's we've needed to take some steps back and really look at how students are relating to each other, and so we've brought in restorative practices, which is an approach that looks at problems or conflicts, because not all problems are conflicts, but problems or conflicts as opportunities for learning. And so, oftentimes if there's a problem between a student and a teacher, for example, it's because they're not understanding each other, right? And so empathy comes into play there. Well, what do you think, how do you think your teacher felt when you did that? And also in my work, working with teachers to help them understand where the student is coming from. But as well in conflict resolution, whether it's just a small little piece of drama between a couple of girls, or whether there's been a fight, or whether there has been any cyberbullying. And I have to mention as well, I know I didn't mention this before, but in the last year and a half, our office referrals due to cyberbullying have decreased 46%. So we're not, yeah, so that's huge. That's really big.
And what do you think has contributed to that?
I think, spending time talking about what we're going to do differently next time, what's at the root of any problem, why we think that the other person maybe did what they did, and then what we're going to do next time. And those are the tenets, those are sort of fundamental questions related to restorative practices. And you can't practice restorative justice without empathy. It's absolutely key. Empathy and accountability. So I think that's been a big part, and that learning and that explicitly teaching students these skills and the language that they need to be able to communicate, because empathy requires that understanding, but also the ability to communicate that understanding. So that's second, and we do that through just a lot of conversation and play now.
So I was actually going to ask then, obviously we're biased towards toys, but what was the perception when you actually introduced a toy or using a game to talk about something like empathy?
With our staff. Well, I mean, there's a variety of different reactions. Some people were really excited to just have something hands-on to use with their middle school students, because it's harder, right? There's lots and lots of hands-on stuff for little kids, but as students get into junior high and high school, there's a pressure to keep it cool as well. So I think lots of teachers were really, really excited. We did have some skepticism. We rolled it out at an in-service professional development day back in the fall, and we had our entire staff, like from grade 7 to 12 all the way through, because they're using it as well, our high school teachers. And so we had tables of staff in the gym. The acoustics weren't great, and I was kind of we did the spiel on how it works, and I was, making my rounds, and there was one teacher who was particularly frustrated because, how am I supposed to be able to, hear what the guide is saying, or how are we supposed to be able to concentrate with all this noise? And I just said, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder if a lot of our students feel that way as well, with the noise in the classroom or even the noise in their heads that they bring from home, because we never ever know what they're coming to school with. And and I said to him, well, I'll ask you to do what we always just ask our students to do, and try your best. And he just he was quiet, but I think he appreciated it. And I do have to say that in working with this particular teacher and his group of students after that, he was great. He was in there and having a great time. But it was a little bit stressful, so it was nice to be able to draw that connection between the stress that he's feeling and stress that our students feel, because I think we need reminders as educators to be empathic toward our students as well.
That's great. It's cool how you mentioned that there's some skepticism towards play, and which is understandable at that level. But play is also a really neat vehicle to be able to talk about things that are uncomfortable, and it's a wonderful way of sort of creating metaphors that are safe to be able to explore. And I know you've created some really interesting play metaphors with your students. There was a test prep activity that I seem to recall you told us about before. Could you
I think we might have a photograph.
We might actually have a photograph of that. So let's use that internet capability that we have.
Let's see if this
beauty, the magic.
All right.
Hooray. So could you tell us just what's going on in this photograph, and explore what's the creating?
So this is in our grade 8 AP classroom, and the students, the provincial math exam was coming up, and they were really, really stressing out about it. These are students who care, and achievement is really important. So I was working with the teachers a little bit on some, teaching some stress management. So we had to start out with talking about some of the effects of stress on the body, as well as, how it impacts our ability to concentrate. So even though y'all might really know your stuff well, if you're going to stress about it, it's going to impact how you perform. And so we got the toy out, and what you're seeing here is the two players, the guide and the builder. And I did give them a warning because I didn't want to stress anyone out with this activity. But so the people who are whispering, there's the girl and then the boy in the yellow shirt whispering, and what they're doing is they're whispering some of the examples of negative thought patterns that kids who are experiencing test anxiety might be having, and those messages. You don't know any of this, you're going to fail, why even bother? Just some of those negative thoughts that can really circulate in our minds when we're experiencing stress. So they were whispering those things, and we had other students kind of, poking under the table or tapping on the back to represent some of the physical effects of stress and how that impacts them. So it was just a really, really neat way to illustrate it through metaphor, like you were saying. And then, it led nicely into some other lessons on what we can do to manage the stress.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a really, really powerful metaphor. What do you see as some of the biggest results from lessons like the one that you just described? And are there any sort of large-scale results that you see across both the students and staff?
Well, I mean, the bullying, I don't keep stats myself, but the cyberbullying one that my VP was just talking about this week, I mean, that was huge. Just being able to have these conversations, I think when it comes to restorative practices, personally as a counselor, one of the most important pieces to it is the follow-up conversations, in the weeks or days following an incident, whether it's a conflict with a teacher or a conflict between students, to just continue using that language about stopping and catching your own emotional reactions to situations, and think about what the other person might be experiencing. You know, and this is, I think, really, really important for all students, but oftentimes, I don't want to generalize too much here, but boys will be able to own being mad, and I was mad, and he was mad, and I've been having a lot of conversations recently with boys and girls too, but boys particularly, about how anger often is what you see when really underneath it is hurt or embarrassment. And so teaching them to be able to recognize that and, you know, catch themselves from getting too angry and too reactive to realizing that what's happening, you know, what's coming at them from the other person might be a different emotion that isn't as frustrating, that isn't as likely to lead to some kind of a very serious conflict. And, you know, and those discussions about, well, have you ever felt that way? Can you imagine, you know, put yourself in that person's shoes. So your question was, what are we seeing now? And I think we've had these discussions. I've had these discussions before. They're taking less time now. Now students are doing it, maybe not necessarily automatically, but they're doing it more quickly with less prompting, right? And even some students have been able to come and not needed any prompting at all, and that'll be their go-to. So I think that's huge. But I really am a firm believer in that these skills need to be explicitly taught, and they're lifelong skills that they're going to take into, you know, being good citizens. So
absolutely awesome.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we're actually going to open it up now to some Q&A from the audience. So Robin, our first question is, what's hard about teaching empathy? So. Well,
I think one of the ironic things about empathy is that empathy can be pretty easy, except for when we really, really need it. So, like, for example, I've walked into a classroom and I've asked the question, you know, does anybody know what empathy is? And we talk a little bit about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and they still have trouble putting their finger on you know, what a definition is of empathy. But I'll ask, well, okay, so if a new kid came to the school and walked in and you were all staring at him, how do you think he would be feeling? And the hands go up, they know right away, well, nervous, scared, embarrassed, you know. And I'll say, great, you got it, that's empathy. But when a student feels as though they've been wronged by somebody else, whether it's a parent, a teacher, or another student, that's when it's hard. When you're already upset at somebody, to put yourself in their shoes it's tougher. So before being able to do that, they need to catch and be aware of their own emotional reaction. And so we have a lot of conversations about that through the empathy toy after the game has been played, and we talk about all of the different styles, what you saw, who was frustrated, what kind of language was used, and talk about those different reactions that way. You know, what was helpful, that kind of stuff. So it comes out, sure.
That's great. Do you find when you play with the empathy toy, do you get a lot of those sort of visceral reactions that are hard to teach? So, like, do students get really frustrated sometimes, and, like, do you use that as one of those sort of teachable moments, or do you have any?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've had cases hucked across a classroom, and then that's its own separate debriefing. That's okay. I mean, that doesn't happen too much, but yeah, it does get frustrating, and it brings to light different communication styles and how what works for one person might not work for another. So, you know, one boy shared after I was trying to get, you know, the discussion about encouraging language is helpful. And I had one boy say, nope, the pressure is good, that's helpful for me, and, you know, other people weren't really feeling it so much, but it was a good a discussion point about different styles of communication. And then I was witnessing another couple of kids playing, and there was encouraging language being used, but what the builder wanted in that moment was silence, because he needed to concentrate, right? So he actually got frustrated that the person kept talking and talking and talking, whereas some people will just stop talking. So that use of questions and silence in human interaction is a really interesting thing to draw, attention to.
So we've got a question from another educator. So Heidi Seawick wants to know, what do students understand now that they didn't before, after being exposed to the empathy toy?
I think just what empathy is and how it's different from sympathy, and the toy kind of represents us working together to accomplish common goals, right? That's really the metaphor, because the builder and the guide both have to participate. And so in our conversations after and debriefing about, what are the links to everyday human life, they're starting to understand that, in solving conflict, in working together as a team, kind of everybody working together and considering the perspectives and points of view of other people is really critical and important. And I think, anyone who's worked with teenagers before will probably confirm that it's oftentimes they're much like toddlers, and that they really, really can get into their own little bubble and their own little world. And so yeah, it's another avenue, it's another tool to allow them to practice that in a safe, non-threatening way. And then, like I was saying before, in those follow-up conversations, when something has gone wrong, we can refer back to, do you think empathy would help here? And they know, whereas they didn't know before, and they have something concrete and experience to link it to.
That's awesome. Just something you said just really resonated with me. You say it's another avenue to be able to explore things like empathy. Are there any natural complements to the empathy toy, like techniques or other resources that you use that just pair really well with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just one thing that we're just beginning with at our school right now is the 21 leaders. So far we have 8 out of 21. And the idea is that these students are going to, they're sort of our model students. They're students that get along with others well, who are going to be leaders on our floor and ambassadors for our school. So they may sort of have kind of a lunchtime duty, or they may have the opportunity to represent us. Like I said, we just had an open house at the school, so they were there showing parents around and talking about the different programs and things like that. And what's coming up that's really exciting is that they're going to be trained in how to use the empathy toy, and then how to perform their own workshops in classrooms. So we always know that when messages come from other students, I mean, it's so much more effective. So when empathy is modeled, I mean, I can model empathy, but it's much more effective if other students are modeling it as well. Yeah, so those kinds of things are definitely happening.
That's amazing. That's the perfect segue. So I think what we were actually going to, and I think we also have a photograph for this. So your Vice Principal, Cree, actually sent us a photograph. So we're just going to share it now.
Yeah.
So these are actually the 21 leaders.
Yep, the eight so far.
The 8 so far.
Yeah.
So I think what we were really surprised with is that not just being used with like the way that the students have been using the toys isn't just internally, but the idea that St. John's is now excited about using empathy as kind of the core of not only some of their lessons, but really student leadership. Just going to pull the photograph up again.
Yeah.
The way that we kind of see that, and what gets really exciting for us is, where does St. John's want to be a year from now? And where do they see, how do they see 21 leaders playing into that, but just how empathy plays into where St. John's is going to be in about a year?
Well, I think just continuing to change the climate of the school. You know, it has changed already a lot in the last couple of years, but I think reaching out even more to the community. The open house that I mentioned, the senior high guidance department, we had some sort of an amazing race kind of a format for parents to go around the senior high spaces, and at the guidance department for the senior high, they had the empathy toy. They had the empathy toy out, and so our counselors were trying to talk about empathy to the students and the parents together, and they had the parents and the students sitting down and playing the game at our open house. So that was really, really exciting. So I think we'll know that we're doing a good job when the students are using the language more, less prompting, and the messages they're taking the messages home to their families as well. And relationships will improve between, you know, the St. John's staff and families in our community.
Excellent.
Awesome.
We are. Just playing with the settings.
Yeah, we are.
That's okay.
So,
that's all right.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting.
Amazing. Well, I think that wraps up our first webinar series.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
I think that is it.
We'll call that a webinar.
Robin, we're going to show you one last time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, and if you're at home watching, make sure that you're all applauding in front of your screens for Robin, because it was an absolute delight to have her talking about her work. She's doing really important and really wonderful things out in Winnipeg. So thank you again for joining us.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thank you, Robin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.